So hello and welcome to today's video. So we all have games from our past that we played the absolute hell of at some point and became a major part of your life. And this can be any game really. The very first game you ever played, a game you read about in a magazine and instantly got hooked when you played it yourself, ones you used to play with your family, or just even something like playing online and making friends with somebody from a completely different country. But of course, time goes on and you eventually drift away from that game. But sometime down the line in the future, you might find yourself revisiting these old games, be it their original versions, an emulated one, or just flat out remakes. And of course, revisiting old games from your past is usually a positive experience, because you're pretty much going back to a game that helped shape your life in some way. And in the case of single player games, those games are always going to be there, in the same state forever. Fire up your PS1 and throw in Crash Bandicoot, and assuming your disc is still in good condition, it's going to be the exact same game you played when you was a child. Nothing will have changed. But one big difference is in multiplayer oriented games. For quite a lot of them, the landscape does tend to change over time. People will gradually move on from multiplayer games, and there will come a time when the once active battlefields and racetracks just become ghost towns. And I hold the very controversial opinion of revisiting multiplayer games is never really that fun and often a waste of time. And from my own experiences, there's usually 4 different types of fate that often befall the multiplayer genre. And no, I'm not talking about co-op games here. Like many teenage boys who grew up owning an Xbox 360, most of my multiplayer experiences were against other people instead of playing co-op. I am going to touch a bit upon co-op, but for the most part of the video we're going to be talking about like player versus player or player versus everybody or whatever. So outcome number 1 is the game has been completely shut down. Now the older the game is, the more likely this is going to happen. And one of the more depressing outcomes I find, because there's multiple ways a multiplayer game can die, and the most painfully obvious one is the servers are shut down. It's gone forever and nobody's going to play online again. You boot that game up and all you get is an error message. Sometimes the message might even say thank you for playing, but other times it's just error connecting to servers. And all that remains of your time playing these online games are now just memories and maybe some YouTube videos. And by that game shutting down, you may not have a way to experience that game ever again. One fine example of this has to be The Crew, which had a very, let's just say, negative reception to its shutdown. Now, I never played The Crew, it's not really my kind of game, but plenty of people did, and those who did seemed to enjoy it. And when the online got shut down, the entire game just ceased to exist. There was no offline portion of the game available. It angered a lot of the fans because they are never playing that game again. The Crew as a game is gone forever. And for those people who may have had fond memories playing the game in late 2014, it's just that now, memories. You're not going to be able to boot up that game and go for a drive for old time's sake and get hit with that same nostalgia again. And what makes it worse for these online only games is you may not have the same experience or memories with newer entries. Now The Crew is a bit of an extreme example, but it is the norm for these online only games, since they don't have an offline single player component. For a good chunk of games however, when the multiplayer does shut down, the single player aspect remains fully intact. But as I said, I'm not talking about the single player aspect in this video, because they're always going to be there. Now everybody does have their own different good memories of playing multiplayer. For some people it might be making a friend with somebody from a completely different country, or it might just be getting a nuke in Modern Warfare 2, or just trolling people for the hell of it to annoy them and get some laughs. And you won't ever get that on a single player game. Now I just want to reiterate that this video is solely about multiplayer, and I'm in no way insinuating that single player is worse. But it kind of makes sense as to why these games do get shut down. Servers do cost money to run, and if a player base is absolutely tiny, from a company perspective there is no reason to keep it up anymore. Like with Battlefield 1943. I can't really imagine that game had a very active player base on the PS3 in the 2020s. But more often than not, on PC, when this kind of stuff happens, modders get down to work on making their own multiplayer mods. So you can experience the multiplayer as you did all the way back in, I don't know, let's just say 2007. But of course, not everybody plays on PC. But I'd say that when it comes down to this kind of stuff, PC and Nintendo consoles are the only platforms that guarantee to have their servers hosted by the fans, for the fans. Like the DS, Wii, 3DS and Wii U were all completely dead, but fans made quick work to ensure that players can still enjoy the online. It's a strangely wholesome thing that fans really do have a passion for their favourite games, that they try to keep these old games alive. Even if it means that there's only going to be like 10 people playing, it still means that those 10 people are still enjoying the same game they did maybe 10 years ago or whatever. This kind of stuff is usually done out of pure dedication for the game and the fan base. But unfortunately for the average person, when a game is shut down, that's the end of that. Like you can go and Google a guide on how to play Mario Kart Wii online, or how to use Pretender on the DS, but for PlayStation and Xbox, this doesn't seem to really be much of a thing. So games like The Crew on PS4 and Xbox One, GTA Online on the 360, Doritos Crash Course and many more are all gone forever. And there is a slight extension to this actually, especially if it's a predominantly player-hosted server-based game, which are pretty much all found on PC. You know, games like Garry's Mod, where the game is still incredibly active and popular, but individual servers themselves might shut down. That's probably never coming back, like what happened with Tower Unite, a once beloved Gmod server when the team decided to make it into their own game, and the fans didn't really like the game that much, so they kind of rebooted it in Gmod itself again, only to keep getting DMCA'd. So I guess you could say that Tower Unite in Gmod is never returning regardless of how strongly the player base want it to return. But for outcome number 2, the game is still online but only parts of it are still playable. And when I say this, I'm talking about games where the servers are still running of course, but there's barely anybody playing it. This one just makes sense because newer games are always coming out and the majority of customers are likely wanting to be playing the newer titles. So naturally the player base gets smaller over time and eventually only a small handful of people will still actively play it. These kind of games can still be played, but they fall into two groups, either completely dead and there's like you and two other people playing, or the game is on its last legs but you can still find a match pretty easily but only at peak times, like say the weekend. My own experience with this one has to be the first Red Dead Redemption. Before Red Dead Redemption 2 released, I went back to try the multiplayer for the first Red Dead, and this was all the way back in 2018 obviously, when I used to play Xbox. I don't play Xbox anymore, I play on PC. So it might have gotten better, I don't know, but my time with Red Dead Redemption's multiplayer was very mixed. Like in free roaming it was very easy to find populated lobbies since it was the default game mode. But when it came to modes like deathmatching, let's just say about 2 or 3 other people were in that lobby, and in the event of trying to find a racing match, absolutely nobody else joined it regardless of how long I waited. That's what I mean when I say that a game might be dead or dying. You might be waiting forever in some matches, or sometimes you can easily find a match at peak. Like I say, Saturday evenings, you know, when people aren't at work or school. But ultimately, it's not exactly a game that you can just sit down and find a match instantly like you might do in more modern games. Like right now I can fire up my Switch and play Mario Kart 8 and I can find a match within seconds. At least sometimes, but not always, you might be able to play with bots or something, but there's just something about playing with AI that makes you think you might as well just be playing single player instead. The third likely outcome is the game is just completely overrun with cheaters. I find this is very common with older first person shooters first and foremost, especially the older Call of Duty games on the 360. The game might be semi-active and finding a match isn't going to be difficult, but the amount of cheaters you'll encounter will make your time a living hell to the point you'll probably never want to play the game again. When I used to play on the Xbox One and I played Black Ops 2 on the 360 via backwards compatibility, it was a very memorable time. It was probably around 2018 or so again. You can probably pinpoint when I stopped playing Xbox and moved to PC. But it was cooked beyond belief. Like, the last time I played Black Ops 2 on the 360, I remember it was on that firing range map, and some jackass on the other team kept calling in swarms, he was aimbotting and teleporting to the other team and just headshotting us instantly. And yeah, I never went back to Black Ops 2 on 360. Apparently it even happens in zombies where these kind of people ruin the game for you by taking away all your points, weapons or perks, or just even spawning the jump scares randomly on Origins and Mob of the Dead. Sometimes you really do run into some good modders who rather than try to ruin your time will try to spice things up and just keep the lobby entertained. But those kinds of people are very few and far between. I've only ever encountered one person like that, and that was on GTA Online on the PC. Now I know GTA Online on PC is far from a dead game, but it's got a bad reputation for being overrun with cheaters, which it is. But my memories of this guy, I think it was around 2016 or so, he was spawning in DLC cars, cash drops and weapons, but the thing was he wasn't doing it to you randomly, he asked in the chat. He was like, does anybody want a weapon drop, does anybody want to try this new car out for a spin? And if you said no, he'd leave you alone. If you said yes, he'd teleport to you and he'd spawn in whatever it is you wanted. That's the only good experience I've ever had with a modder like that. He respected your choice if you said no and didn't like constantly blow you up or anything, he just wanted to make things a bit easier for the other players I guess. But in very rare cases, it can even be dangerous to play against these people. And when I say this, I'm once again specifically talking about PC. Like on some Call of Duties at least, I think it was from Modern Warfare 2 up to about Ghosts, there was reports that even being in the same lobby as somebody was more than enough for them to gain access to your PC. There's reports of people who were playing Modern Warfare 3, the 2011 version, and while playing their PC automatically opened up that Jeff the Killer jump scare, and some other guy said that he was arguing with somebody, so this other guy opened up, let's just say, explicit homosexual content, and then force closed his PC. And on paper those two do seem relatively harmless, since it was just opening up a web page. But you have to realise about how just terrifying that is really. Just being in the same lobby as somebody gives them control over your PC. And all it takes is one bad actor to use that exploit to dig for personal finances, and you're ruined just because you were in the same lobby as someone. And the fourth and final outcome is the game is still alive and kicking, but the entire scene is completely different from when you played it. The prime example of this one from my own experience has to be Mario Kart Wii. I remember playing the hell out of that in 2010, like I'd get home from school and spend the next few hours playing Mario Kart Wii online. Even though Mario Kart is famous for being relatively unbalanced, you'd always run into all kinds of people with varying skill levels and setup. Like my go-to I think was King Boo on the Wario bike. In the 2020s, the entire Mario Kart Wii scene has changed so much and it's much more drastically different these days. It's way more competitive than it ever was back then. And it's like everybody who plays Mario Kart Wii nowadays just runs that same Funky Kong and Flame Runner combo. And I'd say those people who play Mario Kart Wii often are the kinds of people who know every little trick about the game, even including stuff like ultra shortcuts for every track. So for somebody a bit more casual like me, it wasn't anywhere near as fun revisiting it, since I don't really know any of these specific tricks or ultra shortcuts outside that Daisy Circuit one. And since the majority of those people playing are the ones who know how the game works by every nook and cranny, the odds of you winning are very, very slim. It's like you'll never win again. And while this may sound like a "oh, we can't handle losing" kind of comment, I'd say it's quite the opposite, because one of the best parts of Mario Kart is the unpredictability of it. You could be holding first for about 97% of the race, then you get knocked down to 7th in about 2 seconds flat, or you can go from 11th to 3rd in a single lap. It's very unpredictable, and that's what makes it fun. Being stuck in the lobby where the majority of players know every tiny trick in the game engine just really isn't. But ultimately, I think if you do revisit those co-op games with friends, that's when the good times really do start up again. Just you, a friend or three, and just sitting around chatting like the old days. Fire up Left 4 Dead or COD Zombies or whatever and start remembering those old summer evenings you used to spend on Buried. Since then, you know you're not going to have your game ruined by some other wanker, it's way more enjoyable. But even then, sometimes that might not be possible. Maybe all on different platforms, or due to life circumstances, it might be difficult to find the right time to hop online. But that's it for today's video, why I think revisiting older multiplayer games just isn't really that fun. Sometimes they are just better left as memories. So what do you think about revisiting old multiplayer games? Let me know down below, thank you for watching and have a great day.